Welcome to Understand the Math. In this video, you're going to learn how to write the equation of a polynomial function just by analyzing its graph. We'll go through 3 key steps and look at 2 example problems to show you exactly how it's done. Let's begin with our first example. We are given a graph and we are asked to find the equation of the polynomial from its graph. The first step in finding this equation is to identify the zeros and then determine the multiplicity of each zero. I've written a chart here just to make things easier, and we'll go through this as we graph our function. Let's look at our graph and identify our zeros. Zeros of a polynomial are just the x values where the graph touches or crosses the x-axis. So if we look up at our graph crosses the x-axis here, so that's going to be a 0, and then it touches the x-axis here, so that's also going to be a 0. Let's go ahead and let's write these down. We have a 0 at x is equal to -1, and our graph crosses the x-axis at that point, so our multiplicity is going to be 1. So I'm going to write down m is equal to 1. Now let's look at our next 0. It occurs where x is equal to 1. And when x is equal to 1, the graph touches the x-axis and turns around. So that tells us that the multiplicity is going to be 2. So let's write down m is equal to 2. Now we can go on to our next step, which is to write the polynomial in factored form. I've written down here on the right what factored form looks like. We're going to write down that our polynomial is f of x is equal to a. That's the leading coefficient, which we don't know yet. Our first factor is going to be from the root x is equal to -1. When x is equal to -1, this is just like saying x plus 1 is equal to 0. So let's go ahead and let's write that down. We have an x plus 1 and the multiplicity is 1, so we can just put a 1 there. Now let's go to our next root, and that's x is equal to 1. This is the same thing as x minus 1 is equal to 0. So that's going to be our factor. And we're going to write down x minus 1, but we're going to raise it to a 2 because our multiplicity is equal to 2. Now we're ready to go on to our last step. Our last step says that we have to find the leading coefficient. That's our a. And then just write the equation for our polynomial. To find the leading coefficient, we're going to choose any point on the graph that is not the x-intercept. Often this point is the y-intercept. That's the easiest one to pick because at the y-intercept, x is equal to 0. And then we'll just substitute this point back into our factored equation and solve for our leading coefficient. Let's go back up here to the top and look at our graph and see what point we can use. We want to use the y-intercept if possible, and in this graph that is possible because our y-intercept is y is equal to 2. Let's go back down here and write this point down. We have when x is equal to 0, our f of x is equal to 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this equation and we're going to substitute in x is equal to 0 and f of x is equal to 2. So we have a 2 on the left, and we have a, and then we have a 0 plus 1, and then we have a 0 minus 1 squared. Let's simplify on the right, and this gives us just a, because minus 1 squared is just 1. And that's it. So we found a is equal to 2. Let's highlight that. And now we can substitute that back into our function. Our polynomial function is then f of x is equal to 2 times x plus 1 times x minus 1 quantity squared. And that's it. That is the equation of our polynomial from our graph. Let's look at another example that's a little bit more complicated. In this example, we are again going to find the equation of the polynomial from its graph. You can see that this graph is a little bit more complicated than the graph we had for our first example. We're going to go through the same steps as we did for example 1. Our first step is we are going to identify the zeros and determine the multiplicity of each of our zeros. Let's first go through and let's highlight our zeros. Here's our first one, here's our second one, and here's our third one. Our first zero is x is equal to -1. And notice that at -1, the graph touches the x-axis, but then turns around. So our factor is going to look like x plus 1. Remember, you just changed the sign. And then because it touches the x-axis and turns around, we are going to have a multiplicity of 2. So that's going to be x plus 1 quantity squared. Let's now look at our next zero. That occurs at x is equal to 1. So our factor is going to be x minus 1. And at 1, the graph crosses the x-axis, but notice that it flattens out at that point. So our multiplicity is going to be equal to 3, and we write this as x minus 1 quantity cubed. Then we have one more, and it's actually the easiest one. It occurs at x is equal to 2, and our graph just crosses at that point. So our factor is going to be x minus 2 to the first power. Now what we're going to do is write down the polynomial in factored form. We're going to write it as f of x is equal to a because we don't know what the leading coefficient is yet. And then let's go ahead and let's write our factors in the order of their multiplicity. So I'm going to write down x minus 2 first, and then I'm going to write down x plus 1 squared, and then I'll write down x minus 1 cubed. Now we're almost done. All we have to do is find the leading coefficient. To find the leading coefficient, let's go back up at our graph and see if we can find a point that we can use. Notice that we have a very nice y-intercept, and that's right here. So when x is equal to 0, our y, or our f of x, is equal to -2. Let's go ahead and write that down. So when x is equal to 0, our f of x is equal to -2. We're going to plug that in to our function. So we have a -2 on the left, and then we're going to let x be equal to 0. So we have an a, we just have a -2, we have a 1 squared, and a -1 cubed. On the left, we have -2. So this is -2a times another -1. So we have -2 is equal to 2a, and that tells us that a is equal to -1. So we're going to take a as -1, and we're going to plug it back up into our function. And we can write down f of x. F of x is negative because of the -1, and then x minus 2, x plus 1 quantity squared, and then x minus 1 quantity cubed. And that's it. That's the equation of our polynomial. I hope that you now feel more comfortable looking at the graph of a polynomial and writing down its equation.
If this video has been helpful to you, please consider subscribing to my channel. Keep believing in yourself and have a great rest of your day.